What if the rose you see in apparitions isn't just beauty, but a warning? Now imagine a broken rose, petals that were once whole, a cracked bud, a color that holds both sweetness and an unsettling shadow. This image has appeared in stories, dreams, and Marian symbols, and may conceal an urgent calling for our lives. When we speak off split, rose and of the 7 messages from Medjugorje, not just talking about poetry or beautiful images. We're dealing with symbols that invite awakening, conversion, and a preparation that many people consider vital. Have you ever experienced that moment when a sign, a dream, or a coincidence made you stop as if something greater was trying to speak to you? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you, not to provoke fear, but to bring clarity to signs that many have already witnessed and that point to a coming time of judgment. Understood here as an invitation to purification and inner transformation. Throughout this introduction, I'll show you why the broken rose isn't a riddle floating in the air, how it connects to the unrevealed messages of Medjugorje, and why understanding this symbol can change the way you live your daily choices. It's not about interpreting at random. It's about learning to read spiritual images with discernment without falling into sensationalism. Recognizing fruits, life changes, real conversions, families reunited in prayer that confirm whether a sign is true or just a passing impression. Think of the rose as a mirror. It reflects both Mary's tenderness and a wound that calls for healing. Each falling petal can be seen as a call to repair a broken area of our lives, and each crack in the bud can be an invitation to repair relationships, to intensify prayer, to seek reconciliation. When we link this symbolism to 7 messages from Medjugorje, we perceive a narrative: urgency in prayer, defense of the family, spiritual vigilance, personal conversion, fasting and penance, caution with important decisions, and, finally, a call to persevering faith in the face of trials. I know all this sounds heavy, but my intention here is not to alarm, but to equip, to show practical signs of discernment and offer simple steps for those who feel a tightness in their chest when hearing about Marian prophecies and symbols. Later, I will provide stories, practical signs, and a short guide to actions that anyone can begin today. For now, I want you to hold this image of the broken rose in your mind and ask yourself, what petal of my life needs to be restored? This question is the key to understanding why so many communities and faithful have sought to interpret the unrevealed messages of Medjugorje with seriousness and prayer. Don't close this video thinking it's just another topic of curiosity. Something touched you at the beginning. Leave a comment saying, "This message was for me," when you finish, because your reaction is part of the signal. And if you're ready, I'll guide you now to the next step, where we'll unravel, petal by petal, what the 7 messages are really asking for. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most: an experience, a dream, or even a question. Reading your stories helps me understand what truly matters to us here and also comforts those going through the same thing. Because often, community is the first place healing begins. When you comment, you're not just talking to me. You're talking to others who might recognize a sign, find the courage to change, or simply feel they're not alone. If this video touches your heart, like it. It's a simple gesture that shows this content is valuable and helps more eyes find it. And if you want to follow the next discoveries about the 7 messages of Medjugorje and receive more stories, studies, and practical steps, subscribe to the channel. Your presence here allows me to invest more time in serious research, in bringing true testimonies, and in producing videos that help discernment without sensationalism. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. Each comment, each like, and each subscription is a seed planted so that more families and hearts can be reached by messages that can transform lives. Now, if you're ready to continue, let's move on and unravel, petal by petal, the first of the 7 messages and understand what it wants to tell us today. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject and bring a context that helps us understand why we talk about Medjugorje and Thesplit Roseman's seriousness, care, and a perspective that combines heart and reason. Medjugorje is, for many, a meeting place between the visible and the invisible. Since 1981, reports of apparitions and messages have attracted pilgrims, scholars, and ordinary people seeking signs, healing, and guidance. It is not just a story of apparitions, it is a complex web of testimonies, community reactions, investigations, and spiritual fruits that unfold over decades. When we mention the 7 messages from Medjugorje, we're talking about a set of instructions and warnings that, while not always fully publicized, circulate among faith communities, in behind-the-scenes conversations, and in accounts of transformation that many consider worthy of attention. It's this combination: personal accounts, analysis from religious leaders, and the perceived impact on people's lives that gives the topic authority and compels us to listen with respect and discernment. Understanding Marian symbols, such as the powerful image of the broken rose, requires moving between languages, religious symbolism, the human psyche, and the concrete experience of those who claim to have seen, dreamed, or felt these signs. It is not uncommon for scholars studying religious phenomena to resort to methods that are not only academic but also pastoral, listening to witnesses, evaluating visible fruits of conversion, monitoring changes in mentality in communities, and seeking coherence between message and conduct. This approach prevents curiosity from becoming sensationalism and, at the same time, respects those deeply touched by these experiences. When we speak of authority, then, it is not just citing names or dates, it is perceiving repeated patterns. Real changes in the lives of individuals and families, and a collective movement that transforms beliefs into practices of prayer, reconciliation, and inner silence. A split rose, in this scenario, functions as a symbolic language that demands careful reading. The rose has always carried the burden of tenderness and motherhood associated with Mary. When we break down this image, petals, a bud that won't close, we are faced with a metaphor that speaks of wounds, urgency, and an invitation to restoration. This is where the hidden truth begins to insinuate itself. It's not about predicting catastrophes to inflame fear, but about pointing to decisions that need to be made now, changes in mindset that can prevent regrets later. The transformation we discuss is not just individual. It impacts families, communities, and the small circles where daily choices shape destinies. In other words, a vision can have the power to alter an entire journey, not through the spectacle of revelation, but through the impulse it creates to act with purpose. The stories circulating among those who follow Medjugorje often reveal a pattern, a call to more intense prayer, a reorganization of priorities, a search for simplicity, and a willingness to renounce comforts that obscure the essential. This pattern is what confers a kind of evidence. When dreams, signs, and words repeat the same direction in multiple voices, something there demands attention. There is, of course, the challenge of discernment, distinguishing between a genuine experience that produces fruits of love and peace, and an interpretation that generates confusion or anxiety. Therefore, serious communities encourage balanced personal and communal prayer, spiritual accompaniment, scripture study, and attention to concrete fruits, reconciled people, transformed lives, decisions made calmly and clearly. These fruits are the barometer many leaders use to assess the authenticity of a message. From a practical perspective, the impact of symbols like the broken rose manifests itself in choices as concrete as a family's prayer routine, the decision to perform a house blessing, or the transformation of habits that previously distanced people. When a person changes their mindset about what matters, putting faith and family at the center of decisions, life takes on a new rhythm. This is the kind of change that doesn't immediately appear in the headlines, but is felt behind the scenes. Nights of vigil, heartfelt conversations at the table, forgiveness granted, priorities rediscovered. These are the evidences that, in the long run, support the credibility of a spiritual sign. At the same time, it's important to recognize that the search for answers can also be misused. There are diverse interests at play when prophetic themes gain visibility, from legitimate curiosity to strategies aimed at gaining audience and power. Therefore, part of what we'll do here is to look honestly at the sources, distinguishing testimonies that bring humility and change from those that merely seek superficial impact. This approach protects the truth and helps each person embark on a journey of faith without illusions, but with the courage to face their own inner cracks. True revelation, when it exists, tends to produce fruits that edify, not spread unnecessary fear. That's why, when studying the 7 messages and the symbol of the broken rose, our approach must be twofold: sensitive to the mystery and rigorous in practice. Sensitive because symbols function in the heart. Rigorous because responsible faith demands criteria. When these two dimensions meet, the result is a proposal for transformation that is not abstract. It is an invitation to reconsider important decisions, to rethink mindsets, and to choose paths that generate a real impact on family and community life. In many stories we hear, conversion begins with something simpler: prayer reintroduced into the home, a gesture of reconciliation, a choice to prioritize what edifies and expands until it transforms entire routines. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic by presenting stories that exemplify this dynamic between symbol and action, showing how the image of the broken rose ended up being the trigger for concrete change in the lives of ordinary people. I will present testimonies that, without sensationalism, reveal revelations that translated into practical decisions, from reorganizing priorities to cultivating a spirituality that nurtures relationships. By listening to these stories, we realize that theoretical knowledge about Medjugorje finds verification in the everyday choices of those who decided to look at their own lives with different eyes. With this foundation of understanding, the next step is where we will examine, calmly and carefully, how each of the 7 messages dialogues with the image of the broken rose and with the decisions that shape our journey. Comment below: this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Close your eyes for a second and try to see with me a rose that was once whole, now showing a wound. Petals fall into the ground like pages torn from a book of promises. A bud that can no longer close because, in its center, an ancient crack insists on opening. The color, once bright and red, now seems to have been washed by tears and time, with dark edges that suggest burning. Around this flower, a glow that resembles fire, not necessarily the fire of consuming flames, but a luminosity that purifies, that burns away what is useless to reveal what is essential. This image of split rosettes not just aesthetic, it speaks, in a language that transcends common sense and touches something deep in our collective imagination. Symbols communicate with us in images because the soul often understands images before it understands words, and the rose, in this case, carries layers, tenderness, motherhood, beauty, but also fragility and an urgent appeal. When we describe this scene with sensory details, the dry sound of falling petals, the scent that is now a mix of sweetness and bitterness, the rough texture of the crack in the bud, we allow the metaphor to leave the abstract and enter people's concrete lives. This is precisely why symbolic images like the broken rose are powerful. They condense emotion, history, and warning into a single element. For anyone who has experienced a dream that has stuck in their memory, a coincidence that hit the same spot 2 or 3 times, or a nameless feeling of restlessness, the vision of the broken rose can resonate like a mirror revealing a personal wound, a pending decision, a relationship that needs mending. In the narratives of many believers and pilgrims, there are dreams where the flower loses its petals while the person watches helplessly. Others describe a gentle flame passing through the petals, leaving them immaculate after a painful purification. These variations matter because they show how the same symbol evokes distinct responses depending on each person's emotional and spiritual journey. The rose, traditionally associated with Mary, says a lot about spiritual motherhood. It is an image of care, protection, and a love that seeks the good. But when this rose appears broken, the symbolism becomes a call. It's not a distant warning, like a newspaper headline. It's something intimate and personal. Think of the rose as a map not of geographic locations, but of internal decisions. Each petal that falls off can represent a choice left unmade, a mindset that needs to be transformed, a habit that needs to be abandoned. The crack in the bud can be the hidden truth we tell ourselves, that which we insist on hiding, and which, if not faced, paves the way for greater consequences. When this image recurs in dreams and testimonies, it becomes a signal calling for action and transformation that begins in the heart and spreads outward, impacting relationships, routines, and priorities. It's important to note the contrast between the beauty of the rose and the violence of the departure. This contrast is, in itself, a message about the tension between the sacred and the human, the presence of grace and, at the same time, the need for reparation. Symbolically, the presence of fire around is not necessarily punitive. It suggests a process of purification that, although painful, aims to restore the essence. It's the old metaphor of the forge, metal that passes through fire to lose impurities and emerge stronger. Applied to our lives, this metaphor invites us to evaluate what decisions need to be made today so that, in the future, we won't regret them. Changing a mindset, for example, may seem small, but it has a profound impact on how we live our relationships and how we navigate our personal journey. When we relate the broken rose to the 7 messages from Medjugorje, the symbolic reading gains additional layers. Each message touches on a vital area of spiritual and community life: prayer, family, conversion, fasting, vigilance, careful choices, and perseverance. The broken rose articulates a narrative. Something is falling apart, something that calls for restoration. It could be the petal of neglected prayer. It could be the petal of forgotten family relationships. It could be the petal of faith that needs nourishment. This reading is not intended to close interpretations, but to illuminate possibilities for action. When a symbol points to multiple fronts, wisdom lies in listening to where the call is most vivid within which area of life demands attention. Now the answer often has to do with concrete decisions, taking time to talk to someone, resuming spiritual practices, choosing a different stance when faced with conflict. However, understanding symbols also requires discernment. There's a difference between seeing signs that call for transformation and falling into interpretations that fuel anxiety without producing results. Responsible interpretation observes not only the symbolic revelation, but the tangible effects. It produces reconciliations initiated, prayers resumed, habits adjusted. These results serve as a barometer. If the vision of the broken rose leads to actions that generate peace, harmony, and growth, then its value is genuine. If it generates only fear or conflict and doesn't produce constructive change, the interpretation must be reconsidered. That's why those who follow these signs always recommend a practical triad: prayer, conversations with trusted people, and attention to concrete results. This approach avoids extremism and brings to light the hidden truth that deserves to be brought to light without dramatization, but with courage. Visualizing the broken rose also allows for an exercise in humanity. accepting that we are fragile and that transformation requires work. The image suggests that there is no shame in the crack, but rather the possibility of healing. True transformation often begins with honesty, recognizing where we are broken, and then choosing small, firm steps toward restoration. Sometimes this means economic decisions, sometimes cultural ones. Other times, it's simply the courage to forgive or ask for forgiveness. The impact of these decisions is often not immediate. It unfolds behind the scenes of life, where small changes accumulate daily and, over time, reveal a new inner landscape. It's also worth remembering that symbols like the broken rose act as lenses that allow us to see what was previously hidden. Revelations can occur in discrete ways: a dream, a sequence of signs, a persistent intuition, and, when interpreted with balance, lead to a journey of growth. Revelation doesn't replace personal responsibility. On the contrary, it demanding conscious decisions and a mindset focused on change. Those who allow themselves to be touched by this vision are invited to practice simple gestures that have a multiplier effect: praying more deeply, caring for relationships, making time for what truly matters. These are signs that transformation is not just a concept, but a real force shaping daily life. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, observing how different cultural and personal contexts shape the vision of the broken rose and how this affects the responses of the communities receiving this signal. Skilled interpreters will always consider the environment, local narratives, and the concrete needs of the people before offering a definitive interpretation. By understanding the broken rose with this sensitivity, we can transform a powerful image into a path of wise decisions and lasting impact on the lives of those who receive it. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject and translate, directly and serenely, what the image of the broken rose can mean when we place it at the center of a spiritual reading oriented toward transformation. The rose has always been a symbol of Mary, purity, tenderness, maternal care. When it appears whole, it evokes protection and comfort. When it appears broken, the message changes tone and calls for responsibility. Brokenness, in this context, is not just an aesthetic rupture. It is a sign that something within us is demanding restoration, a call to make decisions that will affect our journey. When thinking about the broken rose linked to the 7 messages of Medjugorje, we realize that this image points to specific areas of human existence that require attention: prayer life, family unity, personal conversion, fasting and penance, vigilance in decision-making, caution with influences, and perseverance. In faith, each of these areas is a symbolic petal that, when neglected, leaves the flower unprotected. Therefore, interpreting the broken rose requires sensitivity and also discretion. We must listen to hearts and studies, hear testimonies, and observe patterns before accepting a definitive interpretation. The hidden truth contained in the metaphor of the broken rose is precisely this: not every revelation arrives to cause uproar. Many arise as an invitation to inner reform, so that life can once again align with that which bears fruit. And fruit, in the spiritual realm, is measured by peace, reconciliation, justice in relationships, and care for others. When a vision or symbol bears these fruits, we gain evidence of its veracity, or at least its pastoral usefulness. This is why serious communities always investigate, monitor, and wait for concrete results before transforming an experience into doctrine. There is also a psychological component to this interpretation. Symbols work in the deepest layers of the unconscious, and therefore touch on memories, wounds, and behavioral patterns. The broken rose can resonate with someone experiencing loss, with someone who feels a promise was not fulfilled, with someone who carries guilt or regret. Recognizing this resonance is important so we don't project onto symbols a universal meaning that, in fact, belongs to each person's personal history. At this point, discernment acts as a beacon, welcoming, listening, and then translating it into practical steps. Transformation then requires a dual movement: internalization and action. It's not enough to feel moved by the broken rose. It's necessary to translate this movedness into sustainable practices. The shift in mindset that the symbol demands depends on small, repeated decisions: choosing presence over distraction, prioritizing important conversations instead of returning to silence, cultivating the habit of symbolic fasting, for example, a time of digital silence to recover inner listening. These are decisions that, over time, produce a real impact and change the inner landscape of a family or community. Behind the scenes of this symbolic dynamic, private revelations also appear, guiding entire communities. Stories of families who resumed spiritual practices in response to dreams or signs. Experiences of forgiveness that refracted long-standing relationships under strain. And decisions that avoided profound ruptures show that symbolic intervention can translate into tangible realities. These behind-the-scenes experiences teach us that spirituality, when applied wisely, acts as a technology for good. Small routines, repeated gestures, conversations of reparation that, although discreet, have the power to change At the same time, it is essential to maintain a critical stance when faced with facile interpretations. Not everything that seems prophetic is necessarily genuine, and not every immediate response is wise. Healthy discernment requires patience, dialogue with trusted people, study, and prayer. Considering the story of the person reporting a vision, observing the coherence of their actions with the message received, and evaluating the concrete fruits that emanate from the experience are essential steps to avoid falling into traps. The truth that truly matters tends to produce fruits that edify, not spread gratuitous fear. Therefore, evaluating the concrete impact of decisions generated by a sign is as important as interpreting the symbol itself. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and show how the notion of judgment can be reinterpreted as a responsible call to everyday change, and how this interpretation, applied sensitively, can generate a process of real healing. Instead of a sensationalist judgment, think of judgment as an invitation to repair what is broken, to make decisions that reorder priorities, and to transform mindsets that block the encounter with what is essential. The broken rose, read this way, is a pedagogical instrument and image that awakens vigilance without diminishing hope. When mindsets change, actions follow, prayer routines strengthen, family conversations gain depth, daily choices begin to reflect values that sustain peace. And it is precisely in this realm of choices that the symbol finds its practical application. Deciding to forgive, choosing reconciliation over pride, opting for a routine that nourishes faith, these are decisions that, taken together, change the scenario and demonstrate that the message has had an effect. The healing journey is not linear. It goes through setbacks and small victories, through behind-the-scenes details that no one sees but which sustain the lasting impact. When a person's or a family's mindset changes, the multiplier effect reaches generations. New habits, sincere conversations, decisions aligned with the common good. These are the revelations that are worth it, not the ones that merely entertain, but the ones that change behaviors. At the same time, we must remember that responsible interpretation is a communal practice. Spiritual leaders, counselors, and witnesses contribute to confirming whether a symbol has led to conversion and good. This cooperation protects against exaggeration and helps direct energy toward actions that truly matter. Now, if this resonates with you and triggers something in your heart, it invites you to reflect on which petal needs attention in your life and to observe the small decisions you can make today. Now, let's continue. Comment, this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Imagine the broken rose as an open book. Each petal a page that speaks of an aspect of life that needs to be read, mended, and lived differently. When we connect this image to the 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje, something begins to clear. It's not just distant symbolism, it's a practical roadmap for transformation, with a direct impact on the decisions that shape our journey. Each falling petal is a call to something concrete, and as I cite these messages, I want you to feel the urgency without letting fear dominate, because here, judgment is an invitation, and purification is a proposal for healing. The first petal touches on the urgency of prayer. Imagine the flower trembling when the prayer routine weakens. It's as if the rose loses color from lack of attention. The initial message calls us to reclaim the time to listen, the routine of dialogue with the sacred that sustains mindsets and choices. When prayer becomes a priority again, small decisions change. The tone of conversations at the table, patience in facing crises, the way we interpret the signs of our daily lives. This is where transformation begins quietly, but the background of repeated attitudes. The second petal refers to family conversion. The broken rose reveals cracks in the relationships that constitute the core of our lives. Medjugorje, in the messages circulated among communities, emphasizes caring for the family as a seed of social change. Conversion here isn't just about feelings. It's about restructuring priorities, choosing restorative dialogues over hurtful words, creating simple rituals that nourish shared faith. The impact of this decision reverberates. Children, parents, spouses, everyone notices the difference. When someone chooses to notice instead of shutting themselves off, the third petal points to vigilance over choices. The vision warns against paths that seem comfortable but lead to the erosion of what is essential. The broken rose is a metaphor for postponed decisions, unfulfilled emotional contracts, promises to yourself that remain on paper. The message here is straightforward. Reevaluate what you've allowed into your mind and your home. Transforming your mindset about consumption, time, and attention is a decision that, though small, at first, changes the course of an entire life. The fourth petal speaks of fasting and penance, not as punishment, but as a spiritual technology that purifies distractions. The image of fire surrounding the rose is not condemnation. It is a method of purification. Digital fasting, fasting from empty words, fasting from habits that distract from encounters with others. These are practices that help us see clearly where the petal is missing. There is a practical effect. By reducing noise, one regains sensitivity. receives simple revelations, and finds space for wiser decisions. The fifth petal reminds us to be careful with influences and with discernment. In times of rapid information and narratives that spread without checking, the broken rose asks us to filter. Not every voice is a guide. Not every warning is a wake-up call. The message here is about prudent authority, seeking advice, paying attention to the fruits our words produce, and, above all, learning to distinguish between what edifies and what disperses. This requires changing the mindset that everything is urgent. Some things require calm, study, and prayer before being accepted. The sixth petal addresses perseverance and faith in the face of trials. When the flower seems to fade, the message insists on steadfastness, not through the strength of pride, but through the power of small, repeated choices. Perseverance changes habits, creates legacies, and transforms contexts. In accounts circulated among witnesses, we see families who resisted impulses and, over time, reaped fruits that justified the wait: reconciliation, healing, and a clearer sense of purpose. This is proof that true change is not a spectacle. It is a process. The seventh petal, finally, summarizes everything in a call to personal and community mission. The broken rose calls us to emerge from isolation and care for others. When a person responds to the symbol with decisions that prioritize the common good, the impact multiplies. The ultimate message tied to the vision is one of shared responsibility. Restoration has a ripple effect, and each act of reparation becomes part of a larger change. This is where symbolism becomes truly transformative action. These 7 readings don't exhaust the symbol's richness, but they offer a practical key. Observe where the petal falls in your life and make a concrete decision to restore it. Among stories, behind-the-scenes stories, and revelations, what recurs most is the simplicity of responses that work: renewed prayer, difficult conversations conducted with courage, small sacrifices that free up space for the essential. The hidden truth that the rose often reveals lies not in spectacular secrets, but in transformed routines, redefined priorities, and daily choices that, together, redefine destinies. There are also cultural nuances that shape how each community interprets these messages. In some places, the rose metaphor can trigger intense devotional practices. In others, it sparks concrete social initiatives, helping the poor, restoring homes, and support programs. Understanding the context is part of discernment. The same image can produce different responses, all valid when they bear fruit of love and peace. The search for authenticity in this field requires intellectual and pastoral humility, recognizing that interpretation is service, not spectacle. Finally, it's important to remember that symbolism alone is no substitute for responsible action. A vision can launch a process. The decisions that sustain it are up to us. Repairing a petal requires time, courage, and a mindset willing to accept changes that seem small but are decisive in the long run. By transforming habits, we see the real impact on relationships, work, and inner peace. These are the revelations that matter, not the ones that merely frighten, but the ones that motivate wise and lasting choices. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic and explore concrete examples of people who handled the broken rose as a decision map, showing how small actions produced big effects on their journeys. Comment below. This resonates with me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and show you, with stories and attention to detail, the practical signs that usually accompany the vision of the broken rose, not as magic formulas, but as small clues that many people recognize when they are in a process of transformation. These signs, when repeated, function as confirmations in everyday life. They are coincidences that cease to be mere coincidences because they recur, seeming to converse with one another, and begin to shape a trajectory. A common example is the persistent dream. Someone begins to dream of petals that fall apart, of a bud that doesn't close properly, or of a burning rose that changes color every time the person finds themselves in doubt. It's not just an isolated dream. These are dreams that persist, that appear at key moments in life before an important decision. After a family crisis, when a conversion begins to blossom. These dreams, reported by numerous witnesses, are often accompanied by an inner sense of gentle urgency, not panic, but clarity. Another practical sign is the appearance of images or symbols in everyday life. Roses in unexpected place, said dried rose on an antique table, petals blowing in the wind near the house. An image of Mary with a damaged flower that catches someone's attention precisely during a time of trial. These repeated coincidences carry weight because they operate as symbolic reminders that permeate routine. People who follow prayer communities report that, after meetings of intense prayer, similar stories emerge in different homes. A brother who dreamed of the rose, an aunt who felt an urgent need to forgive, a young man who began a fast. When these manifestations appear in different voices, in different places, and with the same symbolic core, the sense of confirmation grows, and this is where community authority comes into play. Helping to interpret without exaggeration, there are signs that manifest more internally and, because they are intimate, sometimes go unnoticed if not listened to. A change in spiritual sensitivity is one such indication. Someone reports perceiving God's presence more easily in small things, feeling less resistance to prayer, or experiencing sudden movements of compassion that would previously have been foreign. This increase in conviction is not loud. It is a transformation of mindset that reveals itself in simple decisions, responding to a call for help, resuming a prayer practice, or sacrificing leisure time to nurture a relationship. These impacts are subtle, but they have cumulative power and are often the first fruits that spiritual leaders and communities observe when a symbolic experience takes root. In many accounts, signs of concrete change in families also appear. Discussions that end in dialogue instead of prolonged silence. Family meals that regain meaning. Parents who once again pray with their children. These practical effects are perhaps the most eloquent. Confirmation, because the transformation ceases to be merely internal and begins to produce immediate social impact. When the broken rose prompts decisions that restructure the domestic routine, a house blessing, a night of sharing, a gesture of forgiveness, we are seeing a sign that goes beyond the symbolic. It is action. It has an impact on the fabric of relationships. Other recurring signs involve sensory experiences during prayer, sudden heat, a perceived luminosity in the inner space, tears that appear for no apparent reason, or a feeling of peace that lingers after the moment of prayer. These phenomena are not the norm, nor should they be sought as an end in themselves. However, in serious testimonies, they appear as personal confirmations that accompany a process of conversion. People who have experienced this describe how, after such episodes, clearer options emerge in their lives regarding decisions that previously seemed unclear, a job that needs rethinking, a relationship that needs repairing, a path of service that finally makes sense. That's also important to note. Signs of coherence between words and deeds. When someone claims to have been touched by a symbol and then their life begins to reflect this change, less complaining, more concrete actions, greater attention to others, this alignment serves as a strong indicator. Spiritual leaders often observe whether the experience produces fruits of love, patience, and humility. If the response to the vision is arrogance, personal gain, or division, then the sign needs to be reconsidered. Verification by fruits is an ancient and prudent principle, protecting the community from interpretations that only fuel sensations without real transformation. There are also contextual signs that emerge collectively. Increased group prayer, pilgrimages, consensual accounts of a common symbolic image, pastoral guidance booklets beginning to circulate in local communities. This type of community movement can confirm that we are not facing an isolated experience, but something that touches a broader field. When diverse people feel the same calling and respond with practices that seek the common good, community prayers, aid campaigns, moments of reconciliation, the impact expands, and the symbol gains new depth. However, as with any serious investigation, these signs need to be interpreted with criteria, repetition, coherence with fundamental teachings, visible results, and evaluation by trusted individuals. The hidden truth that a symbol can bring is not an automatic certificate. It is a summons that demands responsibility and wise decisions. Therefore, it is common for spiritual directors to recommend practical steps when faced with these signs: recording dreams and experiences, sharing them with someone you trust, monitoring the results of decisions made, and observing whether true peace emerges as a result. These behind-the-scenes aspects of discernment are as important as the sign itself, because they ensure that the revelation finds practical application without falling into sensationalism. Another type of confirmation comes through small, everyday miracles or providential coincidences that lift a precise burden in someone's life, a door that opens at just the right moment, an unexpected encounter that resolves a conflict, resources emerging for a concrete need. Let's call this a discrete impact, one that doesn't make headlines but changes destinies. People who report these incidents often conclude that a hand was guiding them toward better choice, as in this. Realization strengthens the conviction that the symbol was pointing to something real and transformative. Finally, it's worth noting that practical signs rarely appear in isolation. They intersect and reinforce each other. A recurring dream, a visible change in attitude, a coincidence that saves a relationship, and the emergence of spiritual unrest in communities are, together, a pattern that demands attention. Treating these confirmations with humility and serenity is essential. They are invitations to act, not orders to spread fear. By recognizing these signs along one's path, one can make more informed decisions, adjust one's mindset, and begin a healing journey that produces concrete results in daily life. If this kind of recognition resonates with you, if any of these descriptions resonate with something you've experienced or felt, write it down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to do so, share with me a short story that circulates among prayer communities. I won't use names, because what matters here is the human experience, not the celebrity of the story. It was an ordinary family, work, children, bills, routines that dragged on. Behind the scenes, there were veiled tension silences at the table, doors that closed without conversation, a fatigue of hope that spread like dust. One night, one of the people in that house had a very vivid dream, a large red rose in the center of a dark room. Suddenly, petals began to fall, one by one, and in the center of the bud, a thin crack appeared, like a line of light opening. In the dream, there was also a strange smell, a mixture of old perfume and something warmer, as if incense were slowly burning. Upon waking, this person felt a tightness in the chest and a metallic taste on the tongue, sensory impressions that, for her, were not just images, they felt like a message. The next day, she didn't tell everyone. She began by recording the dream in a notebook, describing the smell, the sound, almost a crackle, like falling petals, and the sense of urgency. This simple act of recording was the first step in a shift in mindset. Instead of burying the experience in shame or ridicule, she treated it as something worth listening to. Then, she decided to conduct a small, practical experiment. That same afternoon, she proposed a family prayer time. Something short, without pomp, just to clear the air. The house, which usually had the TV on in the background, fell silent. As she lit a candle, the aroma of the remaining incense in that old cabinet spread, and a scent, curiously similar to that of the dream, brought a kind of collective memory to everyone. It wasn't a spectacle, it was a sensation, and it was in this shared silence that a son spoke about a harsh word he'd heard at school, that the couple confessed a months-long emotional distance, and that a grandmother mentioned the exhaustion of carrying on the routine alone. The next decision wasn't dramatic, a symbolic week-long technology, fast, no cell phones at the table, no screens before bed, and a pact to have honest, non-accused conversations during meals. These were small, almost humble decisions, but they had a profound impact. Over the days, the effect began to appear as small signs. The first night, a peace that wasn't the cause of everything being resolved, but rather an openness to listening. Later, a request for forgiveness before dinner, a laugh that returned. At coffee time, the crack in the dream remained an image, but began to be interpreted in a practical way. That fissure didn't have to mean destruction. It could be an invitation to restoration. The family began to realize that the broken rose in the dream was actually a map of their misplaced priorities, where invisible guests like pride, distraction, and fatigue had stripped petals from what was sacred. There were also external signs that reinforced their conviction. A neighbor brought a dried rose she'd found on a path. In a parish pamphlet, a phrase about reconciliation seemed to speak precisely to their own experience. And in small conversations within the community, similar stories emerged, as if what touched one house reverberated in others. These elements acted as confirmation, not as dogmatic proof, but as encouragement to continue making coherent decisions. The family then decided to ask a trusted spiritual guide for the house's blessing. The ritual was simple: holy water, a cross made on the door, a prayer whispered in a low voice, hands tenderly touching the doorframe, the scent of a warm candle, the muffled sound of sacred music in the background, and the touch of hands on the doorframe brought a series of sensations, the same warmth many describe when experiencing a moment of encounter with the divine, a mixture of relief and responsibility. Over time, the changes took hold. It wasn't a linear or spectacular transformation. There were setbacks, days when the old irritation returned, nights when anxiety returned, like an unwelcome visitor. But there was also real progress. Difficult conversations were resumed, and this time concluded with concrete decisions. Friends and relatives noticed a difference in the tone of interactions. The children began participating in a small nightly prayer routine they had never experienced before. The mentality of the household shifted slowly, as if a new rhythm had been learned. Less impulse, more pause. Less reaction, more response. The hidden truth the dream brought, that there were cracks to be healed, didn't become a banner of fear. It became a daily invitation to repair, to make good decisions, to prioritize what generates life. The impact spread to practical decisions. One adult reconsidered a job offer that would require extensive travel and chose to be more present. Another agreed to seek therapy to address old wounds. They reduced their television viewing and increased conversations about values over dinner. These are seemingly small choices, but they have a multiplier effect. Such discrete moments show that the symbolism, the broken rose, works best when translated into repeated acts, when mythical language finds application in daily life. This family wasn't the only one to experience something like this. In prayer circles, similar stories frequently appear: dreams that instigate action, symbols that point to forgotten priorities, revelations that generate decisions. There were also moments of doubt. Some neighbors found it strange that spiritual procedures had such an effect. Colleagues questioned whether it wasn't simply psychological suggestion. The practical answer came from the fruits: improved relationships, less restless nights of sleep, a less tense atmosphere in the home. When the fruits appear: peace, attitudes of service, the interpretation gains weight. And that's why community discernment and guidance from trusted people are so important. They help distinguish between an experience that deserves attention and one that should remain private. Looking at this micro-story, we see a pattern that can be repeated, a powerful symbolic image that commands attention, followed by humble, repeated decisions that produce concrete change. Transformation doesn't have to be spectacular. It needs to be genuine and sustainable. The journey that begins with a vision can go through moments of crisis, but it can also lead to a new way of living, with decisions that impact homes and relationships. At the heart of this story is a simple, yet profound lesson. Symbols like the broken rose confront us with choices that can no longer be postponed, and the courage to respond to those choices is what brings healing. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and bring additional examples that show how small, repeated gestures produce lasting impact in the communities that choose to listen. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and to do so, share with me a short story that circulates among prayer communities. I won't use names, because what matters here is the human experience, not the celebrity of the story. It was an ordinary family. Work, children, bills, routines that dragged on. Behind the scenes, there were veiled tension silences at the table, doors that closed. Without conversation, a fatigue of hope that spread like dust. One night, one of the people in that house had a very vivid dream, a large red rose in the center of a dark room. Suddenly, petals began to fall, one by one, and in the center of the bud, a thin crack appeared, like a line of light opening. In the dream, there was also a strange smell, a mixture of old perfume and something warmer, as if incense were slowly burning. Upon waking, this person felt a tightness in the chest and a metallic taste on the tongue, sensory impressions that, for her, were not just images, they felt like a message. The next day, she didn't tell everyone. She began by recording the dream in a notebook, describing the smell, the sound, almost a crackle, like falling petals, and the sense of urgency. This simple act of recording was the first step in a shift in mindset. Instead of burying the experience in shame or ridicule, she treated it as something worth listening to. Then, she decided to conduct a small, practical experiment. That same afternoon, she proposed a family prayer time, something short, without pomp, just to clear the air. The house, which usually had the TV on in the background, fell silent. As she lit a candle, the aroma of the remaining incense in that old cabinet spread in. The scent, curiously similar to that of the dream, brought a kind of collective memory to everyone. It wasn't a spectacle, it was a sensation. And it was in this shared silence that a son spoke about a harsh word he'd heard at school, that the couple confessed a months-long emotional distance, and that a grandmother mentioned the exhaustion of carrying on the routine alone. The next decision wasn't dramatic, a symbolic week-long technology fast, no cell phones at the table, no screens before bed, on a pact to have honest, non-accusatory conversations during meals. These were small, almost humble decisions, but they had a profound impact. Over the days, the effect began to appear as small signs. The first night, a peace that wasn't the cause of everything being resolved, but rather an openness to listening. Later, a request for forgiveness before dinner, a laugh that returned at coffee time. The crack in the dream remained an image, but began to be interpreted in a practical way. That fissure didn't have to mean destruction. It could be an invitation to restoration. The family began to realize that the broken rose in the dream was actually a map of their misplaced priorities, where invisible guests like pride, distraction, and fatigue had stripped petals from what was sacred. There were also external signs that reinforced their conviction. A neighbor brought a dried rose she'd found on a path. In a parish pamphlet, a phrase about reconciliation seemed to speak precisely to their own experience. And in small conversations within the community, similar stories emerged, as if what touched one house reverberated in others. These elements acted as confirmation, not as dogmatic proof, but as encouragement to continue making coherent decisions. The family then decided to ask a trusted spiritual guide for the house's blessing. The ritual was simple: holy water, a cross made on the door, a prayer whispered in a low voice, hands tenderly touching the doorframe, the scent of a warm candle, the muffled sound of sacred music in the background. And the touch of hands on the doorframe brought a series of sensations, the same warmth many described when experiencing a moment of encounter with the divine, a mixture of relief and responsibility. Over time, the changes took hold. It wasn't a linear or spectacular transformation. There were setbacks, days when the old irritation returned, nights when anxiety returned like an unwelcome visitor. But there was also real progress. Difficult conversations were resumed, and this time concluded with concrete decisions. Friends and relatives noticed a difference in the tone of interactions. The children began participating in a small nightly prayer routine they had never experienced before. The mentality of the household shifted slowly, as if a new rhythm had been learned. Less impulse, more pause. Less reaction, more response. The hidden truth, the dream brought that there were cracks to be healed, didn't become a banner of fear. It became a daily invitation to repair, to make good decisions, to prioritize what generates life. the impact spread to practical decisions. One adult reconsidered a job offer that would require extensive travel and chose to be more present. Another agreed to seek therapy to address old wounds. They reduced their television viewing and increased conversations about values over dinner. These are seemingly small choices, but they have a multiplier effect. Such discrete behind moments show that the symbolism, the broken rose, works best when translated into repeated acts. When mythical language finds application in daily life. This family wasn't the only one to experience something like this. In prayer circles, similar stories frequently appear. Dreams that instigate action, symbols that point to forgotten priorities, revelations that generate decisions. There were also moments of doubt. Some neighbors found it strange that spiritual procedures had such an effect. Colleagues questioned whether it wasn't simply psychological suggestion. The practical answer came from the fruits: improved relationships, less restless nights of sleep, a less tense atmosphere in the home. When the fruits appear: reconciliation, peace, attitudes of service, the interpretation gains weight. And that's why community discernment and guidance from trusted people are so important. They help distinguish between an experience that deserves attention and one that should remain private. Looking at this micro-story, we see a pattern that can be repeated. A powerful symbolic image that commands attention, followed by humble, repeated decisions that produce concrete change. Transformation doesn't have to be spectacular. It needs to be genuine and sustainable. The journey that begins with a vision can go through moments of crisis, but it can also lead to a new way of living, with decisions that impact homes and relationships. At the heart of this story is a simple yet profound lesson. Symbols like the broken rose confront us with choices that can no longer be postponed, and the courage to respond to those choices is what brings healing. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and bring additional examples that show how small, repeated gestures produce lasting impact in the communities that choose to listen. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic and offer practical steps you can start implementing today. Translating the image of the broken rose into concrete decisions that generate real transformation in your routine, your mindset, and the impact your life has on those around you. The first thing to understand is that action and prayer go hand in hand. They're not separate choices, as if one were purely spiritual and the other purely practical. When you decide to pray with renewed intention, that prayer shapes the way you make decisions, and those decisions, in turn, bear fruit that confirms or denies the authenticity of that movement. So, start by creating a small daily ritual, nothing grand that becomes an obligation, but a quality time, 5 or 10 minutes, where you are present with yourself and with the presence you seek. It could be upon waking, with your hands wrapped around a warm cup, feeling the steam and letting your breath calm your mind. This simple gesture aligns your mindset for better choices throughout the day. Less reactivity, more presence. Next, consider your home as a training ground for transformation. The house blessing that many traditions suggest doesn't have to be a complex ritual. It can begin with a slow walk through the rooms, touching door frames, opening windows, and letting in air and light, while uttering words of intent for peace, asking for healing for what's broken, asking for the ability to make wise decisions. As you light a candle or burn some incense, allow your sensory senses, the smell, the soft light, the warmth, to become a physical reminder of the commitment you're making. This use of the senses isn't magic, it's pedagogical. The soul learns through touch, smell, and sight as much as it learns through reason. And small, repeated rituals create habits that change the culture of the home. Another effective practice is intentional fasting, understood broadly. It doesn't have to be extreme fasting. It can be a digital fast, for example, where you establish hours without screens, prioritizing real conversations. Imagine the impact of not opening your phone during meals. The flavor of the food speaks volumes again. The stories of the people around the table gain space, and decisions that were previously made under the pressure of notifications are now considered calmly. Fasting can also be about consumption, reducing purchases for a month to observe how the mind reacts to the constant desire to fill voids with objects. These small sacrifices generate clarity and allow the hidden truth, what truly matters, to surface. Speak courageously. A practical decision often begins with a sincere word, proposing a weekly time when each family member shares a victory. And a fear without interruption is an exercise in deconstructing patterns. In these moments, listening has therapeutic value. The person who feels heard tends to let go of defenses and accept change. Use open, gentle questions. What's been weighing on your heart? Or what small decision can I make today to help you? These questions change the culture of the home and have an immediate impact. Don't underestimate the power of a well-placed conversation. Robust decisions arise from frequent and honest dialogue. Seek guidance. The journey is safer with trusted guides. Finding a spiritual leader, counselor, or community that practices discernment prevents hasty interpretations. Bring your records, written down dreams, sensations, coincidences, and discuss them with someone who has experience working with people in the process of change. This step is a practical defense against sensationalism and encourages actions that truly bear fruit. External guidance helps calibrate interpretations and transform perceptions into intelligent decisions. Practice the daily check-in. At the end of the day, take a few minutes to look back at the choices you made. Ask yourself honestly, where did I act in line with what I value? Where was I dominated by habits that weakened the rose? This self-assessment exercise develops a mindset of accountability and contributes to better decisions tomorrow. By writing 2 or 3 points in your notebook something you did well, something that needs to be fixed, you create a record of small victories and learnings that over the weeks become evidence of progress. Cultivate gestures of reparation. When vision points to a crack, the repair is often a simple gesture: apologizing, calling someone you've broken up with, visiting someone who's lonely, forgiving an emotional debt. Gestures like these have an immediate impact and are also indicators that the transformation is bearing fruit. Don't wait for grandiose signs. Start with small steps that require courage, not spectacle. Everyday courage is the raw material for any lasting restoration. Reorganize practical priorities: sleep, food, work, and family time. Many rifts in relationships arise from seemingly neutral choices that accumulate sleepless nights. Limitless workdays, quick, disconnected meals. Making concrete decisions to adjust these is a powerful way to restore petals. For example, deciding that, from now on, dinner at 7 p.m. will be sacred to distraction-free conversations already changes the rhythm of an entire household. Small changes in routine have a multiplier impact. Implement an emotional healing plan. If old wounds are preventing wise decisions, seeking therapy or counseling can be crucial. Recognizing that certain wounds require professional intervention is a sign of maturity, not weakness. Emotional healing and spiritual transformation go hand in hand. By addressing the past, you free up energy for clearer choices in the present and future. Pay attention to the results. The practical confirmations we described earlier: repeated dreams, behavioral changes, reconciliations, are indicators that the decisions made are having an impact. If, after implementing practical steps, you notice more dialogue, less hostility, and greater presence, then the journey is being effective. If not, review your decisions, seek new guidance, and repeat the process patiently. Transformation is a very long-term process. It requires persistence. Finally, remember to integrate beauty and simplicity. Sing a short song before meals. Place a fresh flower on the table. Write a phrase of intention on a piece of paper and stick it on the kitchen wall. These small touches act as sensory reminders. The rose is not just a symbol to contemplate, but a tool to remember choices. The journey of reparation gains momentum when the aesthetics of care enters daily life, as it shapes mindset and inspires decisions. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring how these practices can be adapted to different family and cultural realities, and showing examples of how, with creativity and commitment, anyone can begin restoring the missing petals. Comment below. This resonates with me. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking with me through this reflection. If this content brought clarity or touched something within you, subscribe to the channel. Here I bring research, stories, and practical steps that help you discern without sensationalism and transform signs into real decisions. If you want to mark your commitment, leave the phrase "I'm with you" until the end in the comments. I'll read each one, and this unites us as a community. Also, give a like if you felt this video added something to your day. This simple gesture helps us reach others who need to hear messages of hope and care. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click it and follow me there. I'm waiting for you to continue unfolding these discoveries together with calm and courage.